Hey, ugly. Is that your kid? A defective product just like her mom. These were the words hurled at me by my ex-husband Sean as he scrutinized me and my daughter sitting in the wheelchair. I was pushing it from head to toe immediately upon our reunion after 13 years. I was about to respond with some foul language when Ken, my current husband, spoke up from behind me. "What's wrong with my daughter?" His deep baritone voice resonated so well that not only I, but also the people around us, couldn't help but turn. However, I might have been the only one to notice the chilly undertone in his voice. Looking back at Sean, I could see his face had turned pale. My name is R.A. I'm 35 years old, a stay-at-home mom living with my 3-year-old daughter Natalie and my husband Ken, who is 3 years younger than me. The house we currently live in was originally built by Ken's parents right after we got married. My mother-in-law passed away suddenly from an illness, leaving her elderly husband living alone. We couldn't leave my father-in-law by himself, so Ken's parents handed over the house they lived in to us and moved in with my father-in-law. One of the reasons probably was that they were worried about Ken's financial situation just after he had started his own business. They wanted us to live in their house without having to pay rent, which was a significant decision for us. I was overjoyed by my in-laws' kindness, and until Natalie was born, I used to visit my father-in-law's house every other day, helping with hospital visits and household chores. After Natalie was born, I slowed down a bit, but still made it a point to visit with Ken at least twice a month, helping out wherever we could or giving my in-laws a break to go relax at a spa resort. My in-laws always expressed their gratitude, saying, "We're really thankful for all the help, especially during such a busy time with the baby, and Ken has indeed married a wonderful person." To me, no amount of effort could repay the kindness Ken's family, including his parents and twin sister Sally, has shown me. They've saved my life not once but twice. Ken was marrying for the first time, but I had been through a failed marriage before. I met my first husband, Sean, when I moved to New York for university. We became friends as we moved in on the same day and shared information about nearby supermarkets, home improvement stores, and affordable restaurants. Sean attended a prestigious private university known for its stylish campus and media presence, quite different from my practical university. He was tall and handsome. He often said, "A lot of students at my university come from privileged backgrounds, making it feel claustrophobic for someone from the countryside like me. You and I are alike. It's easier because we don't have to put on airs." And so he started to spend more time at my place, eventually leading to us living together like a couple. Back then, I couldn't believe I was dating a handsome guy like Sean. I thought, I might not have the glamour of the female students on C's campus, but I can be a comforting presence. I ended up doing all the housework, cooking, cleaning, and laundry, which in hindsight was absurd. A man who seeks comfort right at the start of a relationship is hardly ever a good sign, as that comfort is purely self-serving. Love is blind. I ignored Sean's selfishness. When he said, "I want to quit my job because it's tough, but I can't afford to because I don't make much. My classes have gotten harder since I've advanced in my program," I suggested, "Why don't we move into a slightly bigger apartment? Don't worry about the rent." So we moved to a new apartment near our initial meeting place, and I ended up covering all the rent. Sean insisted on having 2 phone lines, one for him and one for me, claiming, "My dad got transferred to Europe for work around the same time I started high school, and my mom went with him. They're very conservative, and if they found out I was living with someone, they might stop sending money or even tell me to drop out. You wouldn't want that, and neither would your parents, even if we're planning to get married eventually." At the time, all I could think about was the prospect of marriage, not considering the implications of his request. This cohabitation put a significant financial burden on me since the apartment lease was in my name. I found myself responsible not only for the rent, but also for utilities like electricity, gas, water, the landline phone bill, and internet charges, all of which were being withdrawn from my account. Initially, Sean had nobly offered, "Since you're covering the rent, I'll pay more towards the utilities." However, it wasn't long before he started saying, "Sorry, RA, I'm short on cash again this month because of social obligations. With job hunting on horizon, I can't afford to turn down invitations from friends in my seminar." So I ended up shouldering all the expenses. Before I knew it, I was also paying for groceries and even the beer Sean drank after his baths, with Sean's contribution being limited to the occasional delivery pizza when his friends came over to hang out. Moreover, whenever he invited seminar or club friends over, he'd tell me, "I haven't told them we're living together because it had just lead to awkward teasing. You should stay away from the apartment for the day." Outside of university classes, all my time was consumed by part-time jobs and household chores, leaving me with no one to confide in, rant to, or seek refuge with, forcing me to spend nights at manga caves or diners. The summers were tough, but waiting on a park swing in the cold, early mornings for the time when I could return home without enough money for warmth, I couldn't help but cry, wondering, what am I even doing with my life? As Sean and I reached our senior year and began job hunting in earnest, I finally snapped, accusing him of living like a leech. "You need to start contributing to living expenses immediately," I insisted. He switched to a soothing tone. "I'm so sorry, RA. I've just been taking your kindness for granted. Please don't be mad at me." His attempt to appease me was blatant, but it only highlighted the imbalance in our relationship. The next day, Sean unusually came to pick me up from my part-time job. When we got back to the apartment, he'd cleaned up the place and prepared a dinner. He seemed to have gotten it from a department store basement food hall, complete with a bouquet, wine, and even a cake. It was the first time I felt truly touched by Sean's thoughtfulness during our long relationship. He then presented me with a ring from a popular casual brand at the time, saying, "This is all I can afford right now, but someday I'll buy you a diamond worth 3 months of my salary." I remember blurting out a cliche about being the happiest I've ever been when he put the ring on my finger. But that was the only happy memory I had. Soon after, Sean said, "I'm torn between getting a job or studying abroad. But if things stay as they are, I'll just end up relying on you again, RA. It's a critical juncture in my life, so I want to try doing things on my own for a while." And with that, he moved out to share an apartment with friends. Left suddenly on my own, I was anxious. But Sean left some of his belongings with me and still contacted me twice a day by email or phone. So I thought, I shouldn't mope around. I need to focus on my job search too. I managed to get an offer for my first choice company and mid-sized trading firm. But around that time, I started receiving strange calls on the landline registered in Sean's name. Naturally, I'd hear the messages left on the answering machine with ominous words like, "We'll be in trouble if you don't repay us by this week, and don't take us lightly." I quickly contacted Sean's cell, but he just brushed it off, saying, "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." Then letters began arriving in the mail filled with words like payment reminder and final notice. When I confronted Sean more forcefully, he snapped, saying, "Stop nagging. I've been putting up with someone as ugly and defective as you this whole time, so the least you can do is pay this off as a thank you." After that, he stopped answering my calls. Deceived by his regular contact, I realized too late that I hadn't asked for Sean's new address. When I tried contacting his university, they refused to give me any information, saying, "We can't disclose that to unrelated individuals." Desperate for any clue, I'd opened some of the cardboard boxes Sean had left in the apartment. Inside were documents from several finance companies hinting at debts, old clothes with no resale value, and a used, outdated laptop. There was nothing that could lead me to Sean's parents' address or his current whereabouts, making me realize I was nothing more than a source of money to him. But things got worse. Not long after losing contact with Sean, 2 men in suits showed up at my apartment, informing me that as Sean's wife and guarantor for his debts, I was expected to repay them promptly. The additional blow, at a time when I hadn't even recovered from the shock of being abandoned by Sean, was enough to devastate me. It was Ken and his family who rescued me from this situation. That's why I've always wanted to do everything I can for my parents and kin. However, as I was pushing my daughter Natalie's wheelchair through the mall, I had an unexpected reunion with Sean, the man who had betrayed and abandoned me 13 years ago. He looked at me and Natalie rudely, then approached with an unpleasant smile. And the first thing he said was, "Hey, ugly, is that your kid? A defective product just like her mom." I was about to lose my temper, not just at the insult to me, but to my innocent daughter, when a man stepped in between Sean and me. It was Ken, my husband. "What's wrong with my daughter?" Ken asked, his voice carrying clearly. Passers-by stopped to see what was happening, but Sean, for some reason, turned pale and didn't retort. As Natalie and I looked back and forth between Sean and Ken, Sean, unable to withstand the surrounding gazes, snapped at Ken, "This is private. It's none of your business, right?" But Ken, unflustered, replied, "I'm involved because it concerns my family. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother speaking to someone like you." Then, turning to Natalie, he said with a smile, "Mommy and Daddy have some business to take care of. Auntie will be here soon to pick you up, so why don't you go to her house first?" Hearing that, I couldn't help but exclaim, "What?" However, Natalie, unusually composed for her age and not easily surprised, said, "Okay, since it's a celebration, make sure you come early." Soon after, Ken's sister Sally arrived with her children, and Natalie left with them, leaving the scene behind. Then Ken, losing the initial momentum and slightly stooping towards Sean, who seemed somewhat diminished by the confrontation, pressured with a half smile, "Let's have an adult conversation, shall we? It's best we move somewhere else rather than providing a free show for the public." Sean, not particularly short but significantly overshadowed by Ken's near 6'3", statured and faced with Ken's unsmiling gaze, probably thought it better than being goaded by onlookers and surprisingly agreed to Ken's suggestion to change locations. The three of them took a taxi and arrived at the building housing Ken's office. With the push of an elevator button and a glance at the tenant directory next to it, Sean realized they were headed to a law firm, which made his complexion turn pale again. But it was too late to run away, so he reluctantly joined them in the elevator on his supposed day off. Ken appeared with a stern face, bringing his wife, me, and a guest, which surprised the office staff. However, by the time we were escorted to the back reception room, they had regained their composure, watching Ken's profile. I managed to calm my nerves, but the only one who remained visibly restless and uneasy was Sean. Seeing Sean's state, Ken, with a sly smile, placed a stack of documents on the table after asking a staff member to bring them and casually mentioned, "It's terrifying how coincidences work, isn't it? To think we'd meet the very person involved before showing this investigation report to the chairman." Sean's complexion grew even worse upon hearing this, but I had no idea what they were talking about. Noticing my confusion, Ken began to explain to both Sean and me. The chairman he mentioned was a major client of Ken's office, the current chairman of a machine tool manufacturing company. Recently, the chairman personally summoned Ken to the company's headquarters, where he was introduced to the chairman's youngest daughter, who had just returned from studying in the United States. The chairman had a special request. He wanted an investigation into a man's background to be kept confidential, and there in the sales department was none other than Sean Smith. "Well, you were using a different spelling for Sean back then," Ken continued with a grin, making Sean's face grow even paler. Ken went on to explain that the chairman's granddaughter, while studying in France, had formed a relationship with a man at the same graduate school, promising each other a future together. This man had dropped out of a university just before graduating and moved to France to enroll in a local university. After graduating, he worked for the company's local branch, but left seeking further education in graduate school. The granddaughter, a smart woman, had fallen deeply in love with this man who supported her through homesickness after enrolling in a French university. Having completed her master's degree earlier than him, she returned to Japan with him and asked her grandfather, the chairman, to approve their marriage and to consider him for a position in the family-owned company. The chairman was completely unaware of this man's existence around his granddaughter in France. However, the executive director, the chairman's daughter, had met the man several times during business trips to France and had been introduced to his parents stationed there. The executive director thought it too sudden for her adult daughter to marry and immediately join the family business as a future executive. So after a private discussion between the doting grandfather and the executive director, they discreetly commissioned Ken's law firm, which had a long-standing relationship with their family, to investigate Sean. Feeling a bad premonition, I asked, "Don't tell me that man isn't Sean, is it?" But before Ken could answer, Sean snapped back, "What? It's a problem if it's me. We've been over for ages. And who I marry has nothing to do with you." Sure, Sean was a part of my past I'd rather forget, and I had no interest in his current affairs, but there was plenty I wanted to say to him out of spite. "Separated. Yes, but right before that, you filed for our marriage without my consent, made me a guarantor for your debts, then disappeared," I shouted, and Sean seemed taken aback for a moment, but quickly smirked. "You say that, but you wanted to marry me back then. I just made your dream come true. And in return, you helped a bit with my debts." Pointing at Ken, he continued, "I was worried when I had to update my passport at the embassy. But when I checked back here, I was relieved to find I was single. I never thought someone as ugly and defective as you would have someone else willing to take you in, so I was worried you might be waiting for my return." Just as I was about to lose my temper again, Ken stepped in. "I thought you had been quiet because you were reflecting, but a scumbag will always be a scumbag," he remarked, then smoothly explained how our marriage was annulled, leaving Sean officially single. It turns out when Sean disappeared and debt collectors came for me, Ken's father, my father-in-law, was the first to offer me advice. One of my part-time jobs was tutoring, and at that time, my student was Ken's twin sister, Sally, who has now become my sister-in-law. Sally was a bright kid, but had started to skip school due to being ostracized by her classmates. Hired by her concerned parents, I learned that Sally was excluded for standing up for a friend who was also being ostracized. Trying to cheer her up, I not only helped with her studies, but also listened to her problems, which endeared me to her parents and grandparents, who began treating me like family. Sally happened to be visiting with her mother to share the news of her recommended admission to the college she wished for right, when the debt collectors showed up at my apartment. Shocked by my exhausted state and furious to learn about the marriage registration done without my consent and being made a guarantor for debts, she immediately contacted her father and grandfather, who brought me to this law firm. From there, my father and grandfather mobilized all their resources to resolve the situation. They started by filing for an annulment due to the unauthorized marriage registration and negotiating with the financial institutions about the invalidity of me being made a guarantor against my will. It was a tough battle, but given their expertise in this field, they managed to successfully resolve both issues. I was told facing a lawsuit for annulment and dealing with stubborn financial institutions was a tremendous effort, especially as Sean was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, overwhelmed by this sudden misfortune, the shock of being abandoned by Sean, and the turmoil that jeopardized my college graduation and employment offer, I worried about how I could ever afford the attorney's fees. That's when my grandfather-in-law offered me a job at this firm, where I worked diligently, hoping to repay them in some small way. Despite my efforts to pay the attorney's fees, the Bar Association's regulations only allowed me to cover the actual expenses with a little extra. Thanks to their efforts, the marriage was ultimately annulled, and I was also released from being Sean's guarantor for his debts. "So technically, you're not Ra's ex-husband. You're just a blemish on her life," they told Sean. Still, Sean seemed unable to grasp the gravity of the situation, retorting, "Well, having a marriage history with such a woman would be boring anyway. And as for the debts, they're probably statute barred by now." At that moment, Ken burst into laughter. Facing Sean's confused reaction, Ken retorted, "The statute of limitations hasn't kicked in. I believe you'll be seeing some collection efforts starting this coming week. Sean might have thought that after 13 years, his debts were time-barred, but thanks to my grandfather-in-law, they were not. I was removed as a guarantor. The financial institution, unable to track down Sean, devised a plan and transferred Sean's debt to a debt collection agency they had ties with. In cases like Sean's where repayment was dodged or delayed, making the bad debt unrecoverable, financial institutions often sell these debts to debt collection agencies. These agencies then are professionals in collections, employing all legal means possible. Thanks to their extensive knowledge of the law, the agency that purchased Sean's debt was no exception. After proceeding with various legal steps, a court judgment initiated by the collection company has reset the statute of limitations for another 10 years, making the debt fully valid today. Moreover, the total debt, now inflated with accrued late fees and legal costs, has skyrocketed to several times the original amount. Hearing this, Sean momentarily looked disheartened, but then defiantly claimed, "Ah, such trivial money. Once I marry into that company's granddaughter's family and land a job there, it'll all be manageable." Such was Sean's shallow thinking. He probably assumed that marrying into the family as planned and securing an executive position at his father-in-law's company would make the debt repayment seem trivial. However, when Ken reminded him, "Do you remember what I mentioned earlier, who had hired me to investigate you?" Sean's face turned completely pale. The truth is, Ken is Sally's twin brother. While I had little interaction with Ken when I tutored Sally, only exchanging greetings, Ken had developed an interest in me after hearing Sally sing my praises like a sister. Eventually, as I unexpectedly started working at the office, and with Ken having passed the bar exam during his university years, he began working there too. He proposed to me, considering marriage despite my past, and owing much to my grandfather-in-law and his family. I initially refused, feeling it was improper. Yet Ken revealed he had known about Sean all along and still wished to marry me with the full support of his parents, grandparents, and Sally. By then, my parents, fully aware of my circumstances, also blessed our union, leading to a happy marriage with Ken. Unlike me, who wanted to seal away the past, Ken had harbored a desire for revenge against Sean for years. The request from the chairman was initially thought to be a coincidence of names, but further investigation confirmed that the Sean Smith, who was the chairman's daughter's boyfriend, was indeed the same Sean Smith who had discarded me like trash. Based on that, Ken was about to submit the report first thing next week. You might have gotten away with it using different spelling overseas, but in here, it doesn't work that way, Ken said, admonishing Sean for thinking such shallow tricks would work on a lawyer. He revealed that he had already sent an email and a report to the chairman and his granddaughter. Since then, we've occasionally received inquiries from that financial institution checking if they had located you. I've also informed them about your situation, Ken continued. Suddenly dropping to his knees, Sean begged, "Please, somehow convince the chairman and the others that it was all a mistake." But Ken, with a sarcastic tone, questioned, "Why should I, a lawyer, tell such blatant lies to a client, especially when you've insulted my young daughter, who is in a wheelchair because of an injury, calling her ugly and defective?" The truth about Natalie's injury, how it happened while she was on her way to violin practice, deeply moved everyone. Today was supposed to be for Natalie's celebration of winning a prize in an art competition. Still, Sean's unexpected appearance turned it into a complete disaster. Ken, utterly doting on his daughter, was undoubtedly furious, not just because of Sean's past actions, but also because of the vile words directed at Natalie. Even as Ken coldly dismissed him, Sean, without any shame, continued to plead loudly, "Please, the future of a man's life is at stake here. Are you going to ruin it?" Ken responded firmly, "Which right do you have to say such a thing? What you tried to do to R and the chairman's granddaughter was exactly the act of ruining someone's life. It's like the saying, curse others, and you dig two graves, a boomerang that came right back at you. You should accept it gracefully." When Sean still tried to cling to him, Ken brushed off his arm and said, "The exit is that way," calling the building's security to escort Sean out with a flick of his hand. As Sean's cries and resentments faded away, Ken and I exchanged smiles. Later on, Sean rushed to his girlfriend, the chairman's granddaughter, and made excuses. But she, already harboring suspicions, was outraged by the revelation of the truth and refused to see him again, effectively giving him the boot. However, the chairman and the executive director, upset over their beloved daughter and granddaughter being hurt, took further action. Sean, attempting to reconcile and bombarding her with messages and emails, was reported to the police for suspicion of being a fraudster trying to marry and infiltrate the company with a fake resume. While it didn't escalate to a criminal case, a warning was issued for the stalking. Sean, persistent in continuing his harassment, was eventually arrested and prosecuted. Though he received a suspended sentence with probation instead of jail time, the conviction meant he could find employment nowhere, not just outside of Tokyo, but across the entire country. Despite superficially returning to his normal life, finding himself in a desperate situation, Sean once again tried to go to America, hoping to find employment there. But with a criminal record, he struggled to obtain a visa and had to give up on that plan. Moreover, after learning everything from the chairman and the police, his parents disowned him, leaving Sean truly alone. Facing unavoidable debt repayment, he tried to find odd jobs. But without a smartphone due to being blacklisted, an expired driver's license, and no fixed address, decent work was impossible to come by. I heard through the grapevine that he ended up working for a shady handyman service introduced by the debt collectors, living in a dormitory with no privacy, and working from dawn till dusk. But I decided to forget about it as soon as I heard, as it had nothing to do with me. On the other hand, Ken and I moved from our suburban house to a condo near the private elementary school Natalie plans to attend once her injury has healed. Natalie, who has been averse to taking the train since the accident, liked the bus accessibility and the view from our high-rise apartment, seeming happier every day. The previous house was a remodeled version of Ken's parents' home, so when Ken suggested selling it to move, I worried about what his parents would think. However, they, enjoying their second life in a warm sea town, told us the happiness of our son, his wife, and our granddaughter is what matters most. Don't worry about us. They actually encouraged us to go ahead with the move. Being closer to my workplace means more time spent with the family than before. It was a good decision. Ken, enjoying the new life as much as Natalie said, watching them. I've been thinking about trying something new myself.